Hello Year 11, I'm recording this video to support you with including dialogue within your stories. And in particular, this is to support those of you who are doing the Taxi Tales scheme of work at the moment for creative writing. I noticed that some of you in 11 West 5 who will be watching this video struggled a little bit with how to lay out dialogue in a story. So this video today will show you how we can transform a conversation between a taxi driver and someone called Mary into written dialogue that is suitable for a story. Because in a story, we don't write dialogue like this. We instead use speech marks to indicate dialogue instead. So I'm going to model for you the first 6 lines of this conversation and how I would write it out in the form of dialogue. Okay, so to start off, we use speech marks to indicate that somebody is speaking. So we put any words that are spoken in a conversation into speech marks. So I'm going to start my dialogue by opening my speech marks, and then I'm going to write down my first bit of dialogue, which is this. Hello, miss, do you need a taxi? Okay, so this is what the taxi driver says. I've got my speech marks to show that somebody is speaking, but I also need to make it really clear for my reader who's actually asking that question. They might be able to infer it's a taxi driver, but I want to make it really clear for them. So after my question, my bit of dialogue, I'm going to write asked the taxi driver. Just to make that really clear for my reader. Okay. So I've got the opening of my dialogue here. I've got my speech marks to show that somebody is speaking. And I've signalled at the end of my sentence who is speaking and how they're speaking. So I could put said, but because he's asking a question, I've used the verb asked instead. Okay, so we can see the next person that's speaking is somebody called Mary. So I need to now write down what Mary says. Now this is very important. When you have somebody new speaking in dialogue, we have to start a new paragraph. So instead of putting Mary's dialogue here, I'm going to leave a line blank and I'm going to put her reply here. So Mary says yes. Now, if I just wrote that in my story, it wouldn't be clear for my reader who's actually saying yes. So I'm going to turn this full stop into a comma to continue my sentence. And I'm going to end my sentence by saying, replied Mary. Again, I could just use the word said here, but remember, we're trying to show off to an examiner that we have a wide vocabulary, that we can use lots of different kinds of words. So I've chosen the word replied instead. Okay, so the taxi driver then asks, do you have any luggage? So again, I've got a new speaker, so I'm going to start a new line. I'm going to open my speech marks and I'm going to write down what the taxi driver says. So, do you have any luggage? And again, I need to finish my sentence with a verb and who is speaking. So do you have any luggage? I could use asked again, but I'm going to try and use a different word that means something similar. I'm going to use the words inquired. So this means the same as asked. So inquired the taxi driver. Okay, then Mary says, just these 2 suitcases. So it's quite clear for my reader now that this is a conversation between two people. It's a conversation between a taxi driver and someone called Mary. So I don't have to, at this point, a little bit further into my dialogue, I don't have to keep saying, said the taxi driver, said Mary. It's implied. So I'm just going to leave that sentence as it is, because as a reader, we can work out by now that this is Mary who's speaking, because there just seems to be two people in this conversation. Okay, so the next thing the taxi driver says, okay, I'll put them in the back for you. Where are you going? And this is quite a long piece of dialogue here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to mix things up a little bit. I'm going to write the first thing he says. Okay, I'll put them in the back for you. And I'm actually going to put my talking verb here in the middle, just to mix things up a little bit, make it interesting for my reader. Okay, I'll put them in the back for you, said the driver. Now I don't need to start a new line here because it's still the driver speaking. You only start a new line when it's a new person speaking. So on the same line, or at least it would be if I had room, I would write the rest of what the driver says, which is, where are you going? And then a new paragraph from a new speaker. Finally, Mary says, the Comfort Inn. Okay, so just to recap then, very quickly, what we've covered so far. So whenever somebody is speaking, what they say needs to be in speech marks. We need to remember to open and to close those. You then generally need to have a talking verb, so a verb like said or asked or replied, to indicate how somebody is saying it. And then you need to say who is talking as well. As you progress through the dialogue, you need to remember that every time you have somebody new saying something, you need to start a new paragraph. And you also need to remember that as your conversation progresses, you might not have to put said the taxi driver, said Mary. You might not have to put those conversation starters, conversation verbs in as you go. Sometimes it's okay to leave them out or to mix things up a bit and to put them in the middle. So hopefully that's been helpful for you, Year 11. What I'm now going to ask my group to do, 11 West 5, is to turn the rest of this conversation into dialogue. So it needs to be laid out like this, because I know it's something that you were struggling with. But for the rest of you, I hope this has been a helpful video as well. Okay, good luck.